our community is in a really challenging crossroads. The way that we have developed our community has not really been in our own best interest and has in some ways ignored prominent historical realities about the nature of America. And this has really come to kind of bite us in the butt, particularly post 9/11, where any actions of Muslims in the public space are scrutinized and exceptionalized to such an extent that Muslims are not allowed to, in a sense, be actors in the same way in the public arena that any other group is. We have to really challenge this dominant narrative. One of the things that I find most disturbing after having sat in on a conference call last night from the Shura Council, and then the very quickly put together press conference by CARE, was this dash to apologize and to condemn first when not even all the facts were known. I think that's what was perhaps a bit disturbing about our communal eagerness, is that we didn't even have all the facts on the ground, and already we were jumping, at the chance to distance ourselves from this. And I observed a number of comments on social media, and just even comments that friends had called or texted me, and we have a lot of soul searching to do as a community, and part of that is the need for us to have the courage to push back on really destructive narratives for our community. And I had made some talking points, and I might just read it out here because I really want this understood. So I was trying to collect my thoughts last night, and I said, the media and white America, when it condemns any crime committed by Muslims, essentially creates its own duplicity by tacitly approving violence committed by whites and Christians. Not really, the Christian part isn't as important from my point of view, but certainly the whiteness part. And for me, the major issue at hand that I see in terms of the public discourse on this is not the loss of life, but the loss of life as committed by Muslims. So if we look at what happened just a couple days before in Colorado, that gentleman walked into Planned Parenthood and executed a number of people, apparently even a police officer. And yet, as we saw, he was taken away without a firefight, and there was this struggle of what to label him. And I don't care about the label, whether he's labeled a terrorist or not. What I'm really trying to get at is that he was seen as simply an infractor of the law. But when a Muslim commits a crime, the outrage is not just simply an infracting of the law, but how dare a Muslim commit a crime? And there is no such outrage when white, particularly white male perpetrators, who, by the way, are 90-something%, if not 95 or above, of all of the public shootings that take place are committed by white males. And yet there's a dual exceptionalism. It's exceptional in the fact that if a Muslim commits a crime, it is directly and unequivocally associated with his or her religion. And in this case, that actually, we don't know all the facts. That may prove to be, we don't know. But when it comes to the white perpetrators, the insistence on classifying each and every one of them individually as lone wolf acts, as mentally disturbed acts, as heinous acts, but always on an individual scope, for me, creates this kind of hidden meta-narrative that it is socially acceptable for whites to commit crimes, or particularly for whites to commit public acts of violence, even though it may be legally unacceptable for them to do so. You may say, how is that the case? Well, I'm speaking here both to the media and to my community. You may ask, how is that the case? Well, case after case after case after case after case of public acts of violence committed by whites, particularly white males, have had zero effect on public policy, have had zero effect on the overall public debate and conscience of America as to how we look at violence. But one Muslim can commit a public act of violence, and it immediately sparks talks of immigration reform, foreign policy, domestic espionage, everything that you can think of. That, again, it creates this kind of exceptionalism. And this is my greatest concern for my community, that when certain representatives, no matter how well-meaning they might be, jump to the opportunity to try to apologize and to say this has nothing to do with our faith. Obviously, we do not see, even in the case of a potentially religiously motivated attack in Colorado, where the person who committed that crime would appear to be on surface value motivated by his own perhaps religious take on things, and yet matter of fact, the white conservatives even double their forces, double their efforts, and re-rally to lobby on the behalf of gun rights and so on and so forth. So again, we see this duplicity in where an act committed by particularly a Muslim, but in some ways we even see some blending here of the Black Lives Matter issues, where if there's some kind of if there's a crime committed by blacks, then we have to again, we change the laws, we change public policy. There's different laws for crack cocaine versus powder cocaine. And when my initial statement was that our community was formed around a great number of ignorances as it relates to American history, American culture, and much of what's happening now, while it's in modern clothes and modern robes, is really nothing new in America. And I find it reprehensible that to date, after how many years has Islam been in America, we don't have one really solid Muslim think tank. We don't have any solid Muslim institute that can help to broker and engage the broader non-Muslim public to address what Dr. Sherman Jackson talked about, the credibility gap that we have. And this is why, Dr. Siddiqui, God bless him, can go in front of the camera and say this is not our faith. But what Dr. Jackson so eloquently illustrated is that there is an apparatus, almost proverbially imagine between you, the audience of this video right now, and the words coming out of my mouth. there is an apparatus that's somewhere in between us and the public that is essentially disintegrating whatever words come out of our mouths and reformulate them into an alternative narrative. And until we can take control over the image of Muslims, the rhetoric of Muslims, and establish a better credibility, just our words are not going to be received in the way that we intend them to, and we will all be indicted, essentially, as a potential threat. And I think this is where we have to have the courage to address the media. However, the addressing of the media, we really need some people, and obviously, this is kind of my own little shotgun vigilante attempt to do so. We really need a savvy media engagement, and I love the work that CARE does. It obviously services the Muslim community in a needed way, but that's not really their specialty, and I don't believe that they're well equipped. And other groups like MPAC and whatnot, I have concerns about some of their policies as it relates to CVE, countering violent extremism, and again playing into those sort of narratives and roles. I just recently, within the last couple months, was invited onto YouTube, and I was asked to address the problem of youth radicalization in the Muslim community. And I was on with Harun Mogul, and the commentator, the interviewer, was like, well, tell us about tell us about how this is affecting Muslims, and what should Muslims be doing in X, Y, and Z. And I said, if you could be radicalized in 140 characters on Twitter, then you were 99% positive radical before that tweet happened. And when we buy into this, we've got to get on social media and we got to do this or that, when we buy into it, what we're essentially doing is indicting ourselves. We're implicating ourselves that, yes, at any moment, any one of us could be activated through some sort of Manchurian candidate thing where somebody on the other end can type in something into Twitter and then boom, we're just activated. And that we're finding that it's particular communities within the Muslim community that are susceptible to whatever that this is. And obviously the facts will need to be plumbed, and we'll have to see what is the case with Sayyid Farouk and his wife. But we've seen before other actors that have left, whether it's here or in the UK, that it's communities coming from either South Asian or Arab background predominantly, some from the Somali community. My point being, and this isn't about throwing those communities under the bus, it's just perhaps there are things in those communities that need to be addressed. What are the inadequacies perhaps of middle class or upper middle class South Asian or out of culture, in which people feel alienated, disenfranchised, disillusioned, so on and so forth. And I know that because as an imam and as a counselor, I deal with this, and I see this as realities. I don't see the same thing coming out of the black community. This doesn't mean that, I don't know why I'm so misunderstood on this. This doesn't mean that black American Muslims are somehow better. It just means that this is not a universal issue for, or I say universal risk, perhaps is a better word, for all Muslims, but this is of particular communities, and therefore let's do some research on those communities. Let's see what's going on, and let's not continue to apologize and indict ourselves as if we are all some random security risk. So I just wanted, I wanted to put forth a few words on this after, I sat in on a couple of conference calls last night, and, I'm not going to mince words. I was very disappointed at the lack of planning, the lack of dialogue, and the lack of foresight. I understand that there are segments of the Muslim community that are very scared about the potential blowback on our community from this, and I empathize. You know, my wife wears hijab, she wears headscarf, and is very visibly Muslim, and I have, you know, I do sympathize with that. But you know, the Quran says what, you know, وَالْفِتْنَةُ أَشَدُّ مِنَ الْقَتْلِ, right? That, you know, trials and tribulations in some ways can be worse than death. And we have to, we need to have, you know, there needs to be a real team huddle between all the different acronyms and the imams, scholars, sheikhs, you know, activists. There has to be a team huddle, and we have to come up with a playbook that does not involve indicting ourselves. And we, again, you know, we have to ask, why is there this duplicitous acceptance of white violence in the public space, but a lack of acceptance when it's done by any other group, particularly by Muslims who, you know, categorically have been some of the least likely to do so. And we have to realize, you know, these things aren't going to go away. You know, I was very disappointed to see a number of Muslims say, oh God, you know, I wanted to sympathize when I saw the carnage, but my only thought and prayer was, please don't let it be a Muslim. And this goes back to the idea, وَالْفِتْنَةُ أَشَدُّ مِنَ الْقَتْلِ, that, you know, trials and tribulations in some ways can be worse than being killed. And that's a cowardly thought and a cowardly act. And our community needs, again, to do some real soul searching, and God willing, inshallah, some soul changing.